if you don't have any problem with going into the synagogue, because it will be an ecumenical affair. And the place has seating capacity for about 2,000 people. They're expecting to have 700 or 800 people there. So everyone is welcome to come, and I highly recommend it. I'm sure she is going to have a good program there, because her programs were great when they were here. Well, let's see, another great program for us. It turns out that each one of them seems like, I've heard people say, well, that's better than any of them that we've had. And our speaker tonight, I don't know, is it all right if I read that first letter? That'd be all right? I thought it was good. He really wasn't in favor of the United States getting involved in that war in Europe. And he got his draft notice, and he was drafted October 17, 1942. And I think that's the one I wanted. It looks like they got me. This place is called an induction center. It's sort of a prison enclosure for new soldiers, pending assignment to a training base. Except when given jobs to do, we are confined to our barracks awaiting the call to move out. This can come in 15 minutes or in a couple of weeks. I'm writing this letter from my spacious 2x4 bed located about 2 inches from the ceiling. If the would-be tough guys infesting this place pray for anything, it's to get shipped out to some other camp as soon as possible. Rags was lucky. I guess that's a friend of his. He shipped out a couple of hours ago. Somebody told me he knew Rags, and I can't remember who that was, but maybe there's somebody here that knows Rags. Today has been especially satisfying one. All this morning was spent collecting ashes in a truck. By noon, they must have realized I had real talent. I was promoted to a larger truck and spent the afternoon collecting garbage. It's probably part of the program they advertise, learning a trade while in the Army. Tomorrow, I'm slated to learn the dishwashing trade, but won't be sure until 5:30 a.m. So that's where he started, and he said it goes down from there. So let's see, before we get started, one thing I forgot was we do need donations to keep the program going, and Joe Solomon in the back has a copy, has the item that we're going to raffle off at the beginning of next month's program. It's a beautiful jewel box that Jack Boucher made. He's going to do the Vanna White, is it, to show you? It's a nice-looking thing with trays that are removable inside, so you can put all of your goodies in there. And we'll raffle that off at the next one. There are donation envelopes in the back. If you put your name and phone number on it, two things will happen. You'll be in the raffle, and you'll also have your name on our list so that we can make phone calls to you to tell you when the next program is. And so, good job, Joe. And now I think before we get started, let's stand and say the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Let's fix it up here. There should be something on there to keep the noise down, but I'm going to stick this one on your belt. This on it. Okay. All right, thanks, Brian.
Okay. Thanks, Don. I hope I can be heard. This is the second talk I'll be giving about the war.
What do we get now?
Start again.
Testing, I think they say.
We got you? You do?
Okay, I think we're okay. This is the second talk I'll be giving about the war. So you see I'm no rookie. I gave the first one yesterday. And it was a very pleasant experience. I gave a talk to 6th, 7th, and 8th grade kids, children in a school locally. And they were very, very interested in the story of World War II, very attentive. And after I finished, there was a question and answer session, and we ran out of time. That's how interested those boys were. As part of, I understand, of their social studies course they're going to take, World War II. It gave me a great feeling. I know most of us out there would feel great about it too. The picture we handed out was a very poor photo of a plane we had in our squadron. It was called the Sweet Pea 078. It became the pride and joy of our squadron. At the time, I was assigned to the 15th Air Force, flying from Italy, Foggia, and this really did become our pride and joy. No one can figure out how it ever got back. The story came out after the war, the full story, but I heard it through my pilot, who became a very good friend of a survivor. The way the survivor told Bob Davis, my pilot, when he went into the CO, when he came back, and told the CO, you can hang me, you can shoot me, you can cut off my head, but he didn't say head, I'll never go up again. He was a staff sergeant and broke him down to a corporal, and he became our mail clerk. It's really quite a story. Here you have the beast.
Let's see. This will give you more room. Okay.
Here we have the B-17. Carries a crew of 10. In the front is a bombardier with these two twin 50 caliber machine guns. The models we flew had a chin turret on. Directly in back would be my little desk as navigator on the port side. The pilot and co-pilot would be sitting in the cockpit. Directly behind that would be the engineer turret gunner. Then would come the radio man, two waist gunners, and the tail gunner. And then you had the poor guy who had the worst job in all the world. He was cuddled up on the belly turret here, all alone, looking at the ground of the fuselage, I guess. And here's the way it must have been for those flight on the September 21st, 1944, based on my own experience. Approaching the target, you are about 5 miles up, maybe trying for 30,000 feet. It's about 50 degrees below zero up there, and just about the same inside your plane. For clothing, you'd have your inch-thick flight suit, and under that you would have your electrically heated flying suit plugged in, and then if you're lucky you had on your long johns someone sent from home. So that's the way we survived the cold up there. Then we'd have the parachute harness strapped on us, and then we'd have our flak vest and helmet, either one are very close to our side. We've been on oxygen for hours, ever since we reached 10,000 feet. And really the mask does bite into your face. Because of the noise and the thin air, you can communicate only by intercom with a throat mic. And in the case of this case, from what I learned, in the middle of their bomb run, they got rid of their bombs. They got a direct hit, and that's the picture you have there. The only difference between the picture and the true story is instead of 2 men being killed, it was 4 men. I've heard it described as a direct hit as a duck might meet a shotgun blast. That's how it is. The nose goes up, you fly down, fall down. So what happened here, the pilot sent the engineer gunner, the top turret gunner here, back to assess the damage that had been done. And this is his report. Most of the midsection is gone. There are no elevator or rudder controls. The oxygen equipment has been damaged. Dead or dying were 4 men, both the waist gunners, the radio man, and the tail gunner. So the pilot is all set to give the bailout order. When he gets the report, the bull turret gunner is still alive, but he's sealed in there, almost like welded in from the blast. So if you can use your imagination, I often have, what would the pilot do, or what do you think you would do in a case like that? There are 5 of you left, including yourself, that could possibly survive by bailing out. You'd sacrifice the bull turret man. It's a tough decision, and I've often talked to other pilots who said they wouldn't know what to do. But here's the way I think it happened. And this is based on the story that came out after the war. The surviving crew were prepared to bail out when they discovered the bull turret gunner was trapped in his crew position. They put it very simply, so they elected to return to Amendola using engine control since the cables to the elevator and rudder had been severed by the implosion. The aircraft landed on the dirt next to the steel plank runway. As it settled, the bull turret, with gunner still inside, drug along the ground with only a few stringers holding the tail section onto the rest of the aircraft. That gunner survived and was removed from the turret using a blowtorch to cut through for an exit. Another article I said termed the landing this way. It landed on a mud-covered, unfinished airstrip, landing gear down, tail wheel up. I'm sorry we couldn't have had this picture on the wall or something. It shows how the plane landed in the mud. So the impossible really did happen, unless you believed in miracles. And the really weird ending of the story is that plane was patched up, and I flew in it. As I said in my letter home, if I can find it, I wrote home to say that it actually has been flown. I was flying in it in training missions. So it's a really weird story, I think. But that's the way our missions were run in those days. When getting back from a mission, the old shot glasses and rye, bourbon, and scotch bottles we put out, and after a couple belts, it was debriefing time. Then I would write a little summary of the flight as I remembered it. For instance, this would be mission number 2, December 6, 1944. Brief for Brux, Czechoslovakia, but hit Pilsen instead because of weather. And here we used technical terms, I don't even know what they need now, but hit heavy but inaccurate flak over Pilsen. We're hit hard by flak all the way back to Prague. Heavy, accurate, intense. Our formation was cut up, and we returned to base in small groups, 7 holes in our plane. Sweated out gas and were prepared to ditch in the Adriatic Sea, but made it home okay. To lighten the plane, just about everything was dumped out except ourselves. Brooks had 237 guns. Another one would be December 11th, 1944. Brief to hit Vienna, Moose Bierbahn oil refinery. Bomb racks malfunction over Vienna. Flak was accurate and intense, 189 guns. Continued on to secondary target, Bruck. Flak was accurate but not intense. We had 10 holes in ship. Just as we landed, we ran out of gas on runway, and number 2 engine caught fire. We were lucky. Another one would be December 16th. And this is somewhat interesting. December 16th, mission number 5, went to Brucks, Czechoslovakia, an oil refinery. For some reason, mission proceeded as planned. Weather clear but undercast over Brucks. Flax was light for our squadron, but they poured it on for the wave behind us. This is the interesting part, I think. German fighters up with new Me-262 jet propulsion sighted. That was the first we had seen their jets. They did not touch our squadron. Our fighter escort really on the job. Brooks had 287 guns. The day after Christmas, mission number 6, target, Bleckhammer Oil Refinery. Went over target at 29,000 feet. Flak heaviest I've ever seen. I was splattered with glass and plastic, but helmet saved getting cut. Entire formation was cut up and dispersed. And it happened to be a friend of ours. Azar and crew seen headed for Russia. No enemy fighters identified, but dogfights seen in the distance. Target was visual, and we plastered it, and got plastered in return. 276 guns. Our tour of duty would be over, if we made it, after 35 sorties, they call it. A sortie meant going over and bombing an assigned target. So sometimes you would get no credit if you had to return before going over the target. I made a note of one, but there are others too. So it's very unusual to finish 35 sorties. The best you could hope for would be the end of the war, really. This would be one flight I got no credit for. Brief to bomb Brod, Yugoslovakia, visually, a highway bridge. Had to return because of undercast after reaching initial point. Received accurate flak at Salvador on return. Picked a large piece of steel from nose of plane which was headed my way, but stopped just in time. So you could see after we went up, if we couldn't hit the assigned target for one reason or another, we didn't even get credit for it. The living quarters over there were not so great. We were housed in 4-man tents. For heat, we burn high-octane aviation fuel in a metal pan on the floor of the tent. The idea is to have the gas drip slowly on the pan from a tube which is connected to an outside metal drum. Every now and then something goes wrong and a tent goes up. Then there's plenty of excitement with flames, smoke, and bullets from exploding 45 cartridges flying around. I had been in the infantry, as I'll tell you later. It brings back thoughts of the old infantry days. Where we ate, however, was very great. Our food, for the most part, was sea rations. Where we aided, however, was great. We have a large and beautiful officers' club building which somehow seems out of place here. According to a girl on German radio we call Sal, that'd be Axis Sally, the Luftwaffe is coming down some night to blow it up. It would be a great loss. While dining on our sea rations, there is even an Italian sextet playing classical music. Real high-class stuff, except for the food. Now this all started about 3 years before getting out. It started on, as Don mentioned, October 17th, 1942. I was not actually a happy warrior, I guess you would say. So I waited to be drafted, and I thought I would take my chances, which did happen. At the time, I was working as a bookkeeper with an insurance company, with school at night studying accounting. I had never built anything that stayed together very long, so I guess it was natural for the Army to put me in an engineering battalion. We were supposed to be a Ranger Division battalion, and we would be trained to do commando work as combat engineers. And here the training was very rough. As I said here, life these days seems to revolve around these so-called divisional problems in the woods. Laying landmines, setting booby traps, building bridges over creeks, clearing minefields, all under simulated battle conditions, which often must resemble real battle situations. So much confusion. At night, when we did get a chance to sleep, there were no blankets, no mess kits when it's time to eat. Sometimes a couple stale sandwiches are supposed to be a meal. Once the water detail got mixed up, so for a day we used whatever crooks we could find for drinking and washing. The point is, what were the results of these trainings? So what I did write was this. I said, it's a funny thing about all this. Although I can't imagine becoming what might be called a real true GI soldier, the system used seems to work. Day after day, it is constant badgering, marching and drilling, hurry up and wait, doing everything by the numbers, keeping busy day and night, lack of sleep, and strict discipline. After a while, you become somewhat of a machine, a tough, lean one, and probably mean enough to kill, preferably the enemy. There are plenty of propaganda movies shown which purport to show how great it is to be killing Germans and Japs, and what a great world will be after the war. On the other hand, I'll bet some officers and non-coms here are hated more than the average Jap or German. Keep the home fires burning. Then, in the beginning of January, I noticed on the division bulletin board that the Army Air Corps was accepting applications for those qualified who might be able to fly. I managed to get an application, and make a story sort of short, which isn't a matter of time. It's a matter of tests and going through all the procedures. On June 10th, the day before the old 88th Infantry Division moved out for maneuvers in Louisiana, my travel orders came through for the Air Corps. The first step on the way to become a cadet was a classification center located at Wichita Falls, Texas. It's called Shepherd Field. From there, the next stop was quite a surprise. This was in the University of Missouri, in Columbia, Missouri. I write, somehow I must have ended up in a different war, or at least a different war. We are housed in a large mansion alongside a beautiful golf course. in one of the most attractive towns I have ever seen. Columbia reminds me of our Philadelphia main line, with pretty homes, gardens and terraces, trees, singing birds, just the way you would want a college town to be. We hear it even has 2 schools for girls, but don't worry, Mom. I still remember the letter you sent me dealing with how to fight temptation. The kitchen and meals are under civilian control, so perhaps that is the difference. It was very nice. Thinking back to the days and nights of foxholes and mud, lousy food, living like animals in the woods, all of this seems unreal, as though I've been transferred to a different world. Of course, they didn't bring me here for a good time, so we'll see what happens. We attended classes here for the usual academic subjects: history, math, geography, physics. Then there were military subjects: meteorology, Army discipline, first aid, and so forth. The West Point system of discipline was used, which was very strict. Physical training was also very tough. Then we had 10 hours of flight time using Piper Cubs. Here I realized that I was not cut out to be a real hot fighter pilot. After that, it was another classification center at San Antonio, Texas. After all kinds of tests, it was decided I qualified for pilot, navigator, or bombardier. My first choice had been navigator, in hopes that I would not be sent back to the infantry, really. And at this point, I became an aviation cadet. I had both my pre-flight training and advanced training at Ellington Field, that was located in Texas, very close to Houston. Finally, on June 30th, 1944, I received my wings as a navigator, second lieutenant. Then it was at Tampa Bay Center for further processing, and I was assigned to a B-17. Final combat training was at Gulfport, Mississippi. Here, combat crews are finalized and trained a team. As I say here somewhere, I was very happy to be assigned to B-17s. I've been assigned to B-17s for high-altitude flying, bombing. This is a lucky break, as it could have been B-24s. We refer to them as flying coffins. While not as fast, flying fortresses can get higher and are supposed to be able to withstand more punishment. At least that is what we are told. Maybe the crews of B-24 Liberators are led to believe the opposite. I went overseas by ship October 1944 and flew my first combat mission a month later. Then I will go into how we were shot down, I think, if we have time. We were shot down on Valentine's Day, 1945, while bombing an oil refinery in Vienna. All of us managed to bail out. There was one casualty, our waist gunner, who was probably shot and killed on the way down in his parachute, as I almost was. His body has never been recovered, I believe. The target was Schwecht oil refinery in Vienna. Since the target was predicted to be visual, according to the weather briefing, we were to go over in squadron trail, or only 9 ships over the target at a time. Just one long, narrow parade of planes. Intelligence reported that Vienna was protected by 350 flak guns, so we knew it would not be a very happy Valentine's Day. We caught accurate flak at the initial point, with the entire bomb run through a cloud of steel. They had our number from the start. Smoke from the exploding shells filled the plane. A piece of flak tore off my helmet, and another zipped along my left leg and threw some flesh at the calf. The bombardier assigned to this mission, March, was hit in the chest with a small piece of flak. Fortunately, he was wearing his flak vest as designed, as a vest. Because of a morbid fear of flak arriving from below and traveling up into my rear end, I had developed the bad habit of sitting on my flak vest. The force of the blow threw March against me, and I landed under the cockpit. We got the bombs off on the target okay, but then our real problems began. The number 2 engine had been knocked out completely, and the prop started to windmill, causing the ship to vibrate worse than an old Model T. Frantic efforts to control a feathered prop were unsuccessful. To finish things off, a fire started in our left wing. A fire near the gas tanks was a sure sign of approaching death, so the order to bail out was given by our pilot, Bob Davis. The plane was in a steep glide and seemed ready to start its spin, which is the end. Then came the plays through the intercom directed to me as navigator. Where are we? Where the hell are we? I knew our location, but the worst would happen. I could not reply. The wire from the microphone next unit had been cut. It's difficult, and here it's true, it's difficult to describe the closeness that develops among members of a combat air crew. Not being able to come through for them at that moment when needed so will always be one of my life's serious regrets. The formation was now almost out of sight. The cover flew away as I pulled the escape hatch lever. Looking down, I could see the fields of foliage far below. What a terrible, low, depressed feeling. All alone in the middle of an enemy country. It must be a nightmare, but no, it isn't. This is really happening. We were at about 22,000 feet as I tumbled out of the hatch. If possible, I wanted to free fall to about 10,000 feet before pulling the ripcord. There is no sensation quite like falling through the air. The only noise is that of the wind whistling past. The only pain is that in your ears as the air pressure builds. These sharp pains were relieved by almost constant popping. I felt myself losing consciousness at about 12,000 feet, so I had to pull the ripcord. The jerk of the chute was sickening, but the big umbrella overhead was a very welcome sight. I had hardly enough time to get settled when bullets start whistling past. First, the hissing noise, then the sharp crack. I guess it's true you may not hear the one that gets you. I'll skip a little bit here. I acted as though I had been hit by hanging myself limply as my head rolled around. Apparently it was a bad performance. The bullets continued to whistle by. The ground started coming at me pretty fast, and I had trouble getting my back to the wind. Once, while trying to turn around, I almost spilled the chute. That stopped my messing around. The trip down, which seemed to last an eternity, finally ended when it cracked into the top of a tall pine tree. And I'll skip a little bit here, it's a long story. I managed to swing to the trunk of the tree, unbuckle the parachute from the harness, and climb down. This parachute hanging over most of the treetop was a dead giveaway and would soon attract company. I started to run through the forest with no particular objective in mind. Because of the snow and heavy flying suit I was wearing, it didn't take long to become exhausted. Walking along a small ridge, I noticed 6 men in the valley below. I knew I was very close to the Austrian border, or perhaps had even crossed over into Czechoslovakia. We had been briefed that some pro-Allied partisan activity was taking place in the area. These men were wearing brown uniforms, not like any German uniform that I knew of. Maybe I had come across a small group of friendly guerrillas. Deciding my only chance was to make a contact, I walked down to them with my hands held high. They started calling out, "Comrade, comrade," and proceeded to shake my hand with friendly pats on the back. Overjoyed, I passed around cigarettes and tried to understand what they were telling me. One of the Slovaks guided me to a small tunnel, and by drawing a circle on the ground, gave me to understand he would be back at 7 p.m. to take me out. The tunnel, about 3 feet high, led to a small chamber. I had just finished cleaning my pistol and was looking over the escape maps we were given when outside I heard a whistle and saw a couple of blue uniforms. Apparently my Slovak buddies had betrayed me. My first thought was of the blue SS troop uniforms and what would be ahead in that case. They started shouting something about shooting and pointing their guns in the cave. From where I lay, the automatic pistols they carried looked like cannons. Immediately all desire for fighting left me. Not that I hadn't that much to start with. For the life of me, I couldn't recall the German word for surrender, so I started shouting, "Comrade, comrade," and proceeded to crawl out with a white handkerchief in my hand and my heart in my mouth. Outside, it seemed to me that the whole German army was waiting for me. It was then that I was marched to a barracks where the Germans, apparently the German barracks, and it's kind of scary there. After a while, a German captain came in, and they, of course, the German infantry snapped to attention. And I had high school in Alney High, so I understood a little bit of German. And apparently, they were not supposed to take prisoners, and I was very, very lucky that day. The next day, I was transferred to another town, a small jail, and there I met some of the crew. Besides the 7 of us, there were about 10 Russian flyers and another American. Of course, we were crowded, but our spirits were high. There was a small window with bars far enough apart so we could slip our hands outside. We spent the rest of the day talking and trading bits of our clothing to kids for odds and ends of food. This is the interesting part, I think. The Russians were in terrible shape. They smelled like long dead fish. They were loaded with lice and fleas. Several of them were wounded horribly, but apparently had received no medical attention of any kind. They tried to be friendly, but it was tough to return their smiles. They were so pathetic. During the day, the Russians were moved out as a group. When the guard returned, we asked him where the Russians were sent. He replied to a special place, letting him imitate the firing of a rifle. Apparently, the Russian POWs were executed in cold blood. We now had the cell to ourselves, but the price was high indeed. We were very lucky, or I was very lucky, to be caught by the regular German army, of course. From there, as airmen, we were sent to an interrogation center near Frankfurt am Main. The 6-day trip to Oberursel near Frankfurt am Main, a distance of about 400 miles, was a taste of hell. It was a nightmare of sleeping on railroad station platforms, waiting hour after hour for trains, cold and hungry in a hostile land, sweating out air raids and mob violence in bombed-out cities. The airman is definitely not liked in Germany, and with good reason. Most of the cities were in ruins. Even church buildings and hospitals destroyed. Every city we entered seemed to be having an air raid, and those periods of waiting in air raid shelters were nerve-wracking, never knowing when mob violence would break out. We were never denied use of the shelters, but by design, I guess, we always ended up closest to the least protected entrance. We were called American gangsters in Germany. And most of the people were led to believe that we had been trained to kill by Chicago gangsters. Several times small mobs tried to attack us, but our guards did a very good job in protecting us. Perhaps more than the fear of civilian mobs was concern caused by groups of SS troops we came across while waiting at the various train stations. Death itself seemed to radiate from their faces, uniforms. We had 4 guards who treated us fairly, in spite of the fact that 2 of them said their homes and families had been lost to the war. They were men about 45 years of age and considered too old for fighting. One fellow called us his kinder. At most large towns, the guards were able to get us soup from the German Red Cross. Otherwise, the rations consisted of hard black bread, margarine, and a spicy sausage. I didn't realize I read this. I guess our digestive systems were not geared for this combination, which produced
Yes.
this is the only bad word I used in the whole book. Produced the most frequent and foul-smelling farts I have ever known. Using the polite term passing gas would not do them justice. All the way up, we received priority on transportation, and often civilians were ordered from their seats to make room for us. In view of our strong smell, it was just as well for them. Because of strafing attacks, it was almost impossible to travel during the day. Then we arrived at the interrogation center. And we knew what was going to happen. The initial interview would be a questionnaire we were supposed to fill out. And we all knew it was there. It was so well known, we were surprised that Germans still use it. It was supposed to be a Red Cross questionnaire, so our loved ones at home could be notified if we were alive. It consisted of perhaps 50 questions, starting with name, rank, and serial number, which was okay, and then leading into other areas, such as our unit operations, previous targets, squadron strength, etc. We had been briefed this procedure was being used as a ploy to get information. In fact, the procedure was so well known, it seemed strange the Germans would still try to use it. Perhaps they felt that any POW who would answer the question did so out of fear or stupidity. In this case, it would be a prime candidate to be broken down for use as a collaborator. After indicating only name, rank, and serial number, I was placed in a small, dark cell, hardly large enough to contain the bed made of boards. There wasn't even a window you could see through. A small bulb hung from the ceiling, which would light every now and then. Otherwise, it was completely and totally dark. And there was heat only a few hours during the day, and it was very cold. I had just a half blanket and was afraid to sleep for fear of freezing. The daily ration was 4 paper-thin slices of bread, a cup of tea, and a plate of what appeared to be cabbage soup. I began to find out what solitary confinement can do to a person's mind. I thought I was going crazy, and even started to talk to myself and dig holes in the walls with my fingers. I never felt so homesick in my life, and I prayed a lot. Then it was on to a POW camp close to Nuremberg. We spent 5 days in a boxcar to go about 110 miles. Five days to go about 110 miles. We were loaded into 3 boxcars normally used to haul cattle. Except for the absence of mooing, I guess we did resemble a carload of packed animals. There was no room for all of us to sit down at the same time. What it boiled down to was you could sit only when someone nearby stood up. There were 2 small barred windows for ventilation and a hole in the floor for bodily eliminations. I'll skip part of that. A bucket was also supposed to be somewhere in the car. I recalled seeing war movies where slave laborers and men and women and children headed for life confinement in concentration camps would be transported like this. And it's true. At that time, I thought it to be only pure wartime propaganda. We were told the top of our cars were clearly marked with POWs on top to protect us from strafing attacks. But then the devils placed our boxcars between oil tank cars. While we were waiting in one marshalling yard, there was some shooting as a plane zipped through, but no one was hit. It could have been that the cars were clearly marked at that. And then we did arrive at this so-called permanent POW camp located near Nuremberg. This would be February to March of '45. During this time, conditions were very poor. The weather was very cold, and we had only a half blanket apiece. There was no heat, and we had only barracks floor for a bed. Too weak from hunger, all we could do was lie around and try to keep warm. Our daily food ration during this period was a slice of dark bread and 1.5 potatoes. The best, I guess the only morale booster was a war news. We received the official German news communiques nearly every day, and things sounded okay after making allowances as to the source. The German, and here's where we call ourselves Kriegies. The German word for prisoner of war is Kriegsgefangenen. Naturally, we POWs were therefore referring to ourselves as Kriegies. The Germans were Jerries, Krauts, or Goons. Goon was a new term to me. Apparently it was based on a weird monster-type character in the Popeye comic strip. The usual German daily food supply, as I wrote it down, was a cup of imitation coffee, an inch-thick slice of bread, supposedly made from sawdust, a ladle of thin soup, sort of a cabbage, with little white worms inside. The occasional Red Cross parcels probably saved our lives from starvation. The cans here were sliced open, so they could not be used in escape attempts. Do I have time going down? Sure. The two things ever present are boredom and hunger. The type of hunger that gnaws at your insides and keeps on gnawing. Even leather shoes start to look like juicy steaks. I'm sure we all owe our lives to the occasional Red Cross food parcels which filter through to us. We know they are previously handled by the Germans, since all cans have been slashed open, apparently so they can't be used in escape attempts. We also think they are taking out a middleman cut. Although we must use the Red Cross food within a short period before spoilage takes place, it sure feels good until a familiar gnawing sensation returns. We're all adults here. I didn't tell this to the kids yesterday. An observation. The normal, everyday subjects of sex and women seem to be absent during the starvation cycle, but return somewhat on a more full stomach. Most of us are too weak to get very far from our bunk except for roll call or to line up for food. The remarkable thing about the soup is the bugs. It's sort of a cabbage soup. and the bugs, which look like little white worms, I suppose come with a cabbage. I close my eyes usually and think protein. We spent the first week here sprawled on the floor without even blankets. Now we have small double-layer bunks. Fleas and lice more or less have the run of the place. In our barracks, we have representatives from the USA, England, France, Greece, Poland, Australia, and New Zealand. Our real danger here was from British night raids, really. As a rule, one day is like the next, except when bombers are overhead dropping their bundles too close to our home. Then there's plenty of excitement and terror. Bombs play no favorites, and 4,000 pounds of explosive, a crack heading your way, is not welcome, especially when there are no air raid shelters or other places to hide. So at night, the British would bomb, and by day we were bombing, so-called precision bombing of military targets. But the British, they had their night bombing on a pattern basis. So we could see them at night using Canadian mosquito bombers. They would come over with all sorts of different colored lights. They'd set up a rectangle, we'll say, or square. And we see the bombers come in later, and they could bomb anywhere within that rectangle. And it got pretty scary sometimes. Then there's always, I say here, the mental strain. Naturally, there is a certain amount of mental strain. Rumors, so much a part of Army life, continue here. For instance, Hitler has ordered the execution of all POWs, which turned out to be true. SS troops are taking all POW camps. The Germans have stopped distribution of Red Cross parcels and so forth. Only now the rumors have more serious mental effect. Not having any type of air raid shelter further adds to the feeling of despondency. While an RAF night raid is indeed a spectacular sight, it is nice to have a hiding place when the show gets close. Plain homesicknesses, knowing you are too weak to fight back, attempt escape, or even run very far, all these things, I suppose, add up to an emotional state of despair. And this was really a scary thing. One day last week, I and many others had a fearful experience. At morning roll call, the German officer announced the occupants of our barracks would be given showers. They can't feed us, but they're going to let us shower. With newspapers and radios referring to mass extermination of Jews and political prisoners by steam and gas, I know I was content to remain in a dirty state. We were marched for about an hour to what seemed to be a concentration camp, and I think now it was Dachau. Then we were herded into a large concrete building, the ceiling of which was interwoven with pipes and shower heads. It was difficult to control the growing feeling of panic. After undressing and waiting for something to happen, it did. Nice hot water. Some here have been POWs for up to 3 years. The old-timers I talk to tell me that conditions weren't always so bad. Until recently, Germany more or less complied with the Geneva Convention rules. Food was adequate, medical and dental attention was available, games and reading material were on hand. Apparently, treatment varied a great deal among the POW camps. All I know is the present state of Germany is synonymous with confusion, cruelty, death, and destruction. The Germans used an expression, alles kaputt. Maybe the rotten war is finally wearing down. Patton is getting pretty close. For the past 2 days, we have been on alert to march out. A march under present conditions would be pretty tough. So we all hope to remain here. Actually, we did march out. On April 4th, we were lined up and marched out about 9 this morning, each carrying his blankets and any food left from the Red Cross package. Walking south, we walked all the distance of some 18 kilometers. Lodging for me this night happened to be a small church, which I'm sure had never served so many at one time. Conditions were so crowded, we were practically lying on top of one another. I had to sleep on my feet leaning against the pulpit. We had been warned we would be shot if we ran for cover during a strafing attack, apparently by our own planes. Our planes were seen from time to time overhead, but only one unfortunate mistake was made by them. While our long column was marching through a small town, its railroad station was by-bombed and strafed. Word came down the line that the POWs were killed and 2 wounded. And then about April 9th, I got to be very, very sick. I'm really scared. Short pains have started in my chest and I'm having trouble breathing. With prayer and help from Bob Davis and Frank Cody, who are with me, I hope I don't fall out. The SS lights are supposed to be shooting stragglers. My lungs continue to be filling up, apparently, and on April 13th, the German captain tried to force me to walk, but I just couldn't keep up. After a few minutes, I fell out in the bushes by a small house, feeling, I guess, as low and depressed as one could be. Now it was just a matter of seeing what would happen next. Since I could carry them no longer, I had given my blankets to Bob and Frank. Earlier, before falling out, I had given my remaining food to a German woman for a glass of water. Completely helpless, I could only pray the SS would not appear. By a stroke of luck or another kindly assist from above, a Red Cross truck came along to pick me up. I was taken to the home and office of a civilian doctor who, after an examination, informed us I had double lobar pneumonia. The Red Cross lady said what sounded like the equivalent, well, what are you going to do about it? The doctor thereupon handed me a jar of large yellow tablets, and we left. I had no idea the proper dosage or even what kind of medicine it was. I do know I swallowed as many and as often as I was able. I later found out that the medicine was a new drug called sulfa that had just come out. Then I did arrive at Dog 7A in Mooseburg by truck. Shortly after arrival at the hospital ward of this Mooseburg POW camp, I was assigned a bunk and fell into a sleep of complete exhaustion. Several days later, I was talking with my neighbor, an English soldier captured in Africa. He informed me I was able to get a bunk only because someone had died shortly before I arrived, and I was lucky to get his bed and blankets. Also, I was lucky because no one thought I would live through the first night. And I'll skip a little bit. It was an interesting place there. In this hospital barracks, I guess you'd call it. This may be interesting. If I felt better, a stay here could be interesting. Except for myself, the room is completely British Armed Forces, including even a few Indian soldiers wearing their turbans. There are also two sort of short, stocky, Oriental-type characters here. My British neighbor explained that they are Gurkhas from Nepal, the legendary perfect soldiers, merciless killers whose principal weapon was a long, curved knife. They are used in guerrilla activities. and have the reputation of always fighting to the death. Apparently, these two didn't buy that sort of thinking. A daily habit they had was that of daily rubbing grease all over their bodies. What I call grease they obtained by trading off some items in their Red Cross parcels for margarine, lard, or other fat. My British neighbor thought it had something to do with their religion. And then, finally, April 29th, we're liberated. I was, as I wrote, Liberation Day. For the past couple of days, there have been sounds of artillery and lots of air activity. Shells were passing directly overhead, and even some mortar fire. Finally today, there was a sound of small arms fire in the camp, and lead started flying a little too thick. I didn't know what was going on. From what I could learn from others in this room and some Kriegies passing through, it seems the Guards and SS troops were fighting each other. It appears the SS were trying to force our Guards to fight with them and put up a defense. The Guards refused, and hence the shooting. Finally, in the afternoon, I heard an American tank had rolled in. What joy. Of course, there was much rejoicing, hugging, praying, and tears of relief. But I had to celebrate in my bunk. Think that's enough, Don? Outside. This is based on a diary my friend Bob Davis wrote. I couldn't get outside at all. It was in bad shape. He writes, "The place is wild. Artillery roars as concussions shake the barracks. Sounds of small arms fire add to the confusion. P-51s buzz above. From the crack of their guns, the 50 caliber shells must be hitting close. An L5, used to spot artillery fire, floats above. Word gets around we are located in the middle of a pitched battle between two SS divisions and the 14th U.S. Armored, but who knows for sure. Some of our Guards, armed with rifles, are seen running into the woods. Amid all this noise and confusion, our men are waving and cheering. So, I'll go down a little bit. The place is truly wild. Kriegers are all over the roofs. Everywhere men run, holler, laugh, and shake hands. Some fellows are acting like children in their efforts to get a 50 caliber shell from the tank's guns. Just notice a Krieg came in with a large picture of Hitler, which became a target over stones and rocks. Campfires burn, with those fellows having food, feasting, and celebration. In our joy, still the artillery booms, and the war continues. A crazy, needless annihilation type of guerrilla slaughter. And that was Liberation Day in Moosburg. Then I spent about 6 weeks in hospitals in Germany and France, and got home July 10th. And the war is still going on, of course, 1945. The war was going on. I was on a 60-day leave, apparently waiting reassignment. I can't imagine anything being that bad in the Pacific, but that was the deal. And then the bomb was dropped August 13th, something like that, and that was the end. And thank you for listening. Thank you.
Another good story with more detail, I think, about the time behind the lines in the POW camp than we've had before. And that's another part of the war that we should know about. We have time for a few questions, if there are some. Would you?
Yeah, fine. I welcome them, sure. Right.
You said that they would cut the cans while you were in the prisons.
Right.
How could they use for escape?
How could they use cans for escape?
Oh, we were getting in the Red Cross parcel, there were cans for us. And before it got to us, they were cutting the cans open. So we had to use them in a hurry, not use it for escape purposes.
You couldn't store them up for use.
Couldn't store them up, in other words, yeah.
And I might insert right here that the Southeastern Pennsylvania chapter of the American Red Cross, we found out in their program last September, I think it was, that they operated a plant for producing these POW packages, and it ran 7 days a week, 3 shifts a day, volunteer labor, packing all of these packages. So
Yeah,
they
we
help
would
to
have,
keep you alive.
we would have starved to death, I'm sure, without those. And the British had their packages too, and the French.
How often did you fly missions? Every 3 or 4 days? Or?
Well, whenever the weather was clear. It all depended on the weather. Day after day, if the weather was clear.
Some other comments, questions? Bill?
How did you manage to get such detail? You couldn't keep a journal day by day, could you?
Yes, I did, as a POW. I managed to hold on to a pencil. And as a POW now, right? And we didn't have any toilet paper, you know. Use grass or whatever we had. But finally, we got a toilet paper in the camp. So I used the toilet paper for what I was intended. And also I wrote the diary, you know, as a POW. And then the rest of it, all my personal effects were sent home from Italy, my squadron. So I had my pilot rating book, for instance, and everything else I had over there was sent home. So I had plenty of material. And then I had destroyed just about everything I could get my hands on when I came back. Even letters to my first wife. But my parents had kept every single letter, over 300 letters, as I recall. And every deuce clip and everything was sent back from Italy, as a matter of fact. And
When you were missing in action, eventually all of your supplies from your locker,
yeah,
including your flight log book,
everything was
sent home, and they kept every bit of it.
Yeah, my parents did, yeah. And then they moved into a retirement home just about the time my wife got sick. And I was cleaning out their attic, and I came across this tremendous carton of stuff. And I didn't throw it away this time.
Well, that's good, and we appreciate it. A copy of the book is being processed today in the library and will be available shortly for you to take out if you have a library card. And if it's out when you ask for it, you can be put on the list, and you'll be notified whenever the book is available.
What is the name of the book?
And the name of the book is
I just call it Recalling World War II, One Personal Experience.
by Edward P. Perry. Recalling World War II.
Yeah, the book got all over the world, but didn't sell too many. We used to take it on cruise ships and all over the world, and wherever you met, from Canada or wherever it might be, England, Italy, Russia, yeah. So there's a lot of books around the world, but not many were sold.
Yeah.
A few were.
Well, I was suggesting that with the interest in World War II and the fact that he has done an updating of the book with things he remembered, this book is basically documentation as was sent home. It's not a whole lot of hype. It's not a lot of reinterpretation. It's what he said when he said it.
Yeah, I
And,
never meant for this to be published, just for my family and daughters and close friends. Then I guess my grandsons, 2 of them, started to give my manuscripts to their teachers. And they said I was sitting on a gold mine. I had to throw more sex into it and stuff like that. You know? but I wanted to make sure everything was documented so I could point to a letter, a V letter, for instance, up here, or whatever it might take. Or my pilot rating books, that how bad I did with the Piper Cubs and things like that. They're getting a kick out of it now.
Yeah.
What am I doing?
Well, there's a little bit of time left. We've got some cookies and probably a little bit of coffee that's not quite as hot as it was. There's another question. How old were you?
I went in October 42. I was born in 21, so I lived in 21. Came out at 24. And I think a lot of us guys were that age bracket came home bitter. Because you think about the best 3 years of life.
From the front end of the book, I recall that his first opinions were that this was not our war. This was a war over in Europe, and we should stay out of it. And many people had that feeling, and even when Pearl Harbor happened and many people volunteered, there were many others who felt still that this was not our war. And Ed was in that camp.
Yeah, but I did have changed my mind on that.
And he did change his mind, and his conclusion at the end of the book was that they did convert him into an effective fighting machine.
Yeah,
Somebody had it.
and we did have a real cause.
And there was a real cause, and it had to be done.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you.
Jim, did you, what do you got here?
Ed, you mentioned in all these raids that you were on that they counted the guns. Do you know how that was accomplished?
No, I don't. Just until, when we went in for a briefing, they would give us our pep talk, of course, and our target and route maps and so forth. And they would give the estimate of their projected air strength from their fighter planes and how many guns were supposed to be in that area. So we knew the number of guns. That's where I got my figures from, the briefing. But I don't think anybody ever really knew. Sometimes I think there are more than they put down anyway.
Thank you.
I see another question. Yes? Can you get your book at any bookstore?
No, it's not. It's in a lot of libraries, isn't it, Alma?
You can get it, you can ask for it here at the Abington Library, and there are, what others?
Upper Southampton.
Upper Southampton Library,
Doylestown, I think.
Lower Southampton,
And Northeast Philadelphia.
Northeast Philadelphia. And if they don't have it, why, have to keep going to another one. It's not in public.
Yeah.
It may be in Doylestown also.
In Feasterville, I know. And then
Feasterville?
the publisher did not send it around a lot of